Traditionally, Muslims begin anything that they do that's worth doing. There's a hadith that says anything worth doing should begin with Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which is also the actual first statement in the Quran. If you open up any Quran, the very first thing that will be read is Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, which means in the name of Allah, the merciful, the compassionate. And Rahman and Rahim are derived from the same root, because Arabic words, and I'm probably going to talk about this a lot over this course of lectures, Arabic words are built on triliteral roots. The Semitic languages are root-based languages. So Hebrew has the same phenomenon. You're dealing with a language in which a semantic field or a constellation of meanings emerges out of primitive root structures, which are based on 3 letters generally, sometimes 4. But the vast majority are 3-lettered, which is interesting in terms of cosmology. 3 is a very interesting number. Because it introduces the idea of multiplicity. From the 1 came the 2, and from the 2 came myriad forms. So 3 is literally the beginning of multiplicity. And so language by its nature, which is almost inexhaustible in a sense, and could in reality be considered inexhaustible, is built in the Arabic language on 3. Now, the Quran itself is a word which also comes from a root word. And there's some differences about it, but generally in English it's written like this, and now becoming more popular like this. Generally the word, the root words here are qa, qaf, ra, and ya. And these are 3 Arabic letters. Qaf is really a letter that probably we don't have an equivalent. It's done in using something in your throat by squeezing the upper portion of your throat together and ejecting this sound qa. Qa. So it almost sounds like a crow. But the second ra is similar to our letter R, ra, and then ya. At its root meaning, you get the word for city, which is interesting because it brings in the idea of civilization. And traditionally, civilizations are built on books. The vast majority of human civilizations, you will find that there is fundamentally a book at the core of the civilization. For the Greek civilization, it would probably be Homer. And in other words, we can't really imagine a Greek civilization without Homer, given what we know about the Greeks. Plato is dependent on Homer. The playwrights are dependent on Homer. For the Hebrew people, it was certainly the Torah, or their Bible. And this will become the foundational book for the Western peoples, the European peoples. The Bible really becomes a foundational book, first in Greek and then in Latin, and ultimately for the English-speaking people, the King James Bible. For the Arabs, interestingly enough, there is no book in the Arabic language until the Quran. There's literally no book. They're an ancient people, and yet there is no book in the Arabic language until the Quran. Prior to that, the closest thing that you could consider literary was poetry that was done orally. And there were 7 odes that were quite popular that were hung in the Kaaba, in the house in Mecca, and were honored by the Arabs, the pre-Islamic Arabs, as being the quintessence of eloquence and of the Arabic art form of poetry. So when the Quran comes to these people, this is a radical departure from any previous concepts within the culture of knowledge and the transmission of knowledge. The other root that you're going to find in here is the word to recite. Qara'a. And qara'a in the Arabic language means 2 things. It means to read and it means to recite. So it has an oral and it has a written quality to it. Now, interestingly enough, if you look there's a really wonderful book which I recommend, particularly all of you, since you're teachers, if you haven't read it, it's really worth reading, which is called A is for Ox by Barry Sanders. And this book is talking about the fact that orality is the substratum of literacy. If you do not have an oral tradition, you cannot have a literate tradition. And one of his complaints is that our culture is losing its orality. The oral tradition in this culture is dying out because of television and other forms of media in which visualization and not orality becomes the dominant means of raising our children. So if you look at children for the first 5 years of their life, they are oral creatures. They're in the oral world. They're not literate. They're in the oral world. And traditionally what would happen is they would hear stories and their imaginations would be ignited. And this was something that took place in all cultures. Now in this country is children being raised in front of the television. So the mother is no longer transmitting the oral lore, the childish lore of the culture to these children, but in fact it's being experienced through the medium of visualization, which is a powerful medium, but it has certain effects. And Sanders believes that one of the effects is the lack of humanization. That he believes that orality is a process of humanization. The fact that the Arabs are an oral people is very significant. They're an oral people, and the Quran is a Quran before it's a book. In other words, the real meaning of Quran is the recital. It is the oral book. And the next word that the Quran is identified as is kitab, which means book. And kataba, the root word, means to join together. It means to join together. So what happens with the Arabs is that in 570 of the Christian era, a boy is born in Mecca to a mother who his father dies prior to that, during her pregnancy, Amina. And this boy is named Muhammad, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And during this time, for the first few years of his life, he is sent to the desert, to the oral Arabs, to learn the language through this tradition of the Arabs in raising. The aristocratic Arabs would send their children to the desert Arabs because they considered that they were the most eloquent Arabs. And they wanted the children to absorb the language within the first 5 years of their life, because they recognized that children that were raised amongst these people who spoke a very powerful Arabic would have also strong Arabic, even if they spent the later portion of their life in the city. And so during this time, for the first 40 years of this man's life, really from all, if we look at it just in terms of a human life, very little matters of significance occur in this man's life. By all intents and purposes, one would really say that had the Prophet not reached his 40th year, that he would have been known amongst his people perhaps for one thing only, which was that he was extremely trustworthy. He was a very quiet person. He did not speak much. He did not quote poetry. He was not a poet. He was not known to engage in discourse with the people. He was a contemplative person. He liked to go off and reflect on his own. He was known to be extremely kind to poor people, to orphans. This is all mentioned in the tradition. Other than that, he had no aspirations of being a leader within his people, as some people would. He was from an aristocratic clan, but he happened to be from a